The best-selling watch ever made isn't a Rolex. It isn't even Swiss. The crown gets all the attention. The auction records, the waiting lists, the magazine covers. But if you rank watches by the only number that can't be faked, units actually sold, Rolex doesn't crack the top two. The watches that beat it were cheap, often plastic, and proudly unglamorous. One of them cost less than a tank of gas. And the watch sitting at number one is the one watch a lot of collectors still refuse to call a watch at all. So today we are counting down 7 watches that outsold every Rolex on Earth, all the way to the one that quietly rewrote the rules of the entire industry. So how does a watch outsell the most famous luxury brand on the planet? It almost never starts at the top. It starts with the watch on a teenager's wrist, the one that taught the whole world that mechanical timekeeping did not have to cost a fortune. Number 7. The Seiko 5. In 1963, Seiko did something the Swiss thought was beneath them. It built a fully automatic, self-winding watch with a day and a date, real water resistance, and a tough, shock-protected movement. And then it priced the thing so an ordinary working person could actually afford one. They called it the Sportsmatic 5. And the 5 stood for 5 promises the watch had to keep: automatic winding, a day-date display, water resistance, a recessed crown, and a case and bracelet built to take a beating. Here is the stat that should have terrified Geneva. By 1966, Seiko was exporting more of these 5s out of Japan than the entire Swiss industry was making in self-winding watches. One model, one Japanese factory, outpacing a country that had owned mechanical watchmaking for 2 centuries. The Swiss spent years treating Japanese watches as a budget curiosity, something for people who could not afford the real thing. They were wrong, and the 5 was the first hard proof of it. And the 5 never really stopped. It spun off into hundreds of versions across 6 decades and sold into the tens of millions, and it became the default first automatic for a whole generation of collectors. Ask almost anyone who got serious about watches where they started, and there is a very good chance the answer is a Seiko 5. That is the quiet power here. It did not win on prestige. It won by teaching people that a real mechanical watch could cost less than a nice dinner. And once people learn that lesson, the rules of the whole market change. But if Seiko proved cheap could be good, our next watch proved cheap could be absolutely everywhere. Number 6. The Timex dollar watch and the Ironman that came after it. Long before Timex was a sports brand, it sold something literally called the dollar watch, priced so low that owning the time stopped being a luxury. That original dollar watch went on to sell more than 40 million units, and Timex backed it with the most honest advertising in watch history. They froze the watches, strapped them to outboard motors, and famously promised, "It takes a licking and keeps on ticking." By the late 1960s, Timex was not just popular, it was the best-selling watch in the world. Those torture test ads were doing something clever. They were not selling beauty or status, they were selling trust. Buy this thing, abuse it, and it will still be running long after you have forgotten how cheap it was. Then Timex did it again. In 1986, it launched the Ironman Triathlon, a chunky digital sports watch that became America's best-selling watch for years on end. And here's the beat that tells you everything. In 1993, a newly elected American president walked into his own inauguration wearing one. Bill Clinton, the leader of the most powerful country on earth, chose a plastic Timex Ironman over anything gold. Critics called it a wrist gargoyle. One of his actually ended up in the Smithsonian. A sitting president picked a cheap plastic watch on purpose, in front of the entire world, and that is exactly why it sold. That same instinct, cheap and proud of it, is about to save an entire country. Number 5. The Swatch. Rewind to the early 1980s. Swiss watchmaking is dying. Japanese quartz watches are cheaper, more accurate, and selling by the truckload. And Switzerland's share of the world watch market has collapsed from around half to barely a tenth. Factories are shutting. An entire craft is staring straight at extinction. Then in walks a consultant named Nicholas Hayek, who looks at the wreckage and makes a call almost nobody in Geneva wants to hear. He says the Swiss should stop trying to out-prestige the Japanese and start beating them at their own game. Cheap and fun. In 1983, that idea becomes the Swatch. a Swiss-made watch with only 51 parts instead of the usual 90+, assembled by robots, sold for the price of a couple of movie tickets, and marketed like a fashion accessory instead of a family heirloom. People bought them in stacks, in every color, by the season. By the early 1990s, Swatch had sold its 100 millionth watch, and those profits quietly bankrolled the rescue of the very luxury names that had once looked down on it. And if you think that is ancient history, look at 2022. Swatch teamed up with Omega for the Moon Swatch, a plastic take on the legendary Moon watch, and people queued around the block like it was a phone launch. The cheap and fun playbook still works. It saved Swiss watchmaking once, and it is still printing money today. So far, every watch on this list won by being affordable. The next one won by being almost impossible to break. Number 4. The Casio G-Shock, and specifically the original square. The entire brand exists because of one broken watch. In the early 1980s, a young Casio engineer named Kikuo Ibe dropped a watch his father had given him, and it shattered on the floor. He decided he was going to build a watch that simply would not break. His target was almost absurd. Survive a 10-meter drop, survive 100 meters of water, and run for 10 years on a single battery. It took more than 200 prototypes, including the story of him hurling them off a tall building to watch them die, before he finally cracked it with a floating module suspended inside the case. The G-Shock landed in 1983, and Casio sold its toughness with a completely straight face. There is an old American ad where a hockey player slaps a G-Shock across the ice like a puck, and it just keeps running. Across more than 40 years now, the G-Shock line has sold over 130 million units. And the purest version of all of it is the original square, the DW5600. No frills, no fashion gimmicks, just the watch eBay set out to build. Ask eBay himself which one he wears, and the answer is the square. When the engineer who invented the thing still reaches for the simplest model in the catalog, that tells you which one actually mattered. Quick thing before we keep going. If you would rather know the real story behind a watch than the marketing version, subscribe. Now, back to the countdown, because the next name on this list is the one you probably assumed should have been at the very top. Number 3. Rolex. And here is where we have to be honest, because this is a watch channel, and Rolex is the most famous name in it. Step back and look at the entire industry for a second. Rolex today makes somewhere around 1 million watches a year, with recent estimates pushing closer to 1.2 million. The Datejust on its own is the single most popular model the company sells, somewhere near 330,000 of them in a single year. The Submariner, the most copied dive watch ever made, only accounts for around 150,000 a year. Those are big numbers for a luxury brand, but they are not big numbers, full stop. Rolex is roughly 6 to 7% of total Swiss watch volume by units, while it takes a wildly larger slice of the actual money. And that is the entire point. Rolex never won the volume war. It was never trying to. It won the value war so completely that we all just assume it must be the best-selling watch, too. It isn't. The most famous watch on Earth does not crack the top 2 by units sold, and it never has. Fame and sales volume are two completely different scoreboards. Rolex dominates one of them. The two watches still ahead of it dominate the other, and they did it for a tiny fraction of the price. Number 2. The Casio F-91W. This is the one. The king of every watch that still looks like a watch. Casio launched it in 1989 for less than $20, and here's the part that breaks people's brains. It is still in production today, basically unchanged, running the same little movement it shipped with over 35 years ago. Casio still makes around 3 million of them every single year, and total sales have long since sailed past 100 million. Think about what that actually means. While the rest of the watch world chased thinner cases, in-house movements, and ever higher prices, a $15 resin watch quietly outsold all of them and never changed a thing. People call it the Nokia 3310 of watches. The gadget so simple and so reliable that it just refused to die. And it shows up in the strangest places. A future American president, Barack Obama, wore one for years before he ever reached the White House. It has been standard kit on the wrists of soldiers in more than one army. Serious collectors keep one in the box right next to watches worth thousands, on purpose, as a kind of reality check. A $10 watch holding its own next to a Rolex is honestly the most grounded thing in the entire hobby. The F-91W is the best-selling traditional watch in history, and it got there without a single ounce of hype, which makes the watch at number 1 feel almost unfair. Number 1. The Apple Watch. And yes, before you start typing, we are going to deal with that. In 2019, something happened that should be taught in every watchmaking school on the planet. Apple shipped close to 31 million Apple Watches in a single year. The entire Swiss watch industry, every brand combined, every Rolex, Omega, Patek, and Swatch added together, shipped about 21 million. One product from a computer company outsold a whole nation's worth of watchmaking in 12 months. And it did it without a single tourbillon, without a heritage story, without anybody pretending it was an investment. And it never slowed down. Add up every Apple Watch sold since 2015, and the number is well past 300 million units, which makes it, by a massive margin, the best-selling watch in human history. Not the best-selling smartwatch, the best-selling watch, period. Here is the catch, and it is the entire reason this video exists. The single best-selling watch ever made is the one watch a huge chunk of enthusiasts flatly refuse to call a watch. It tells the time. You wear it on your wrist. It has outsold every mechanical icon by an order of magnitude. But because it charges instead of ticks, half the hobby wants to slap an asterisk on it. So I am going to hand the real question straight to you. Does the Apple Watch count? If it does, then the best-selling watch of all time is a tiny computer. And that should genuinely change how we talk about this entire industry. If it doesn't, then the crown quietly belongs to a $15 Casio. Either way, Rolex was never even in the running. Tell me where you land down in the comments, because this is the argument the whole watch world is still having. So look back at this entire list. The Seiko that taught people mechanical could be cheap. The Timex a president wore to his own inauguration. The Swatch that saved Switzerland with plastic and 51 parts. The unbreakable square. The $15 Casio that outlived every trend. And a computer that outsold all of them put together. Not one of them was trying to impress anybody. That is the thread running through every single one. The watches that sold the most were never the ones chasing prestige. They were the ones that just quietly did the job, for a price almost anyone could pay. The most expensive watch in the room gets photographed. The cheapest one gets worn by 100 million people. Funny when you think about it, which one actually wins?